other layer that we're going to be having is lines / projectors. One other layer will be points that we will assign to the top of our projectors. Another one will be labels. Those are going to be important. And if for whatever reason you want to reorganize your layers, in some programs you can just drag and drop. That's going to actually drag it into a different kind of, how do I move this thing? Whatever. So I want labels to be right above my, or below my base, so you can actually move your up arrows to kind of organize your layers. And again, I will always say layers are one of the most important things. And our final layer that's going to be kind of our end-all layer is going to be surface. That's our end goal, is to be able to create surfaces of our couch over there. So if we start with the base layer, to start with a grid, I like to do top-down. Anybody can do perspectival modeling, but since we're going to be just making a specific grid, sometimes it's easier just to be top-down. And right now you guys all have trackpads, and it's going to be ridiculous to do 3D modeling, so you guys can kind of follow along, click some of the tools. So the first tool is going to be our line tool. Over in the line tool, if we hover over it, we have all these different options. For right now, we're just going to do single line. And if we don't want to just click our buttons like we're used to, I'm always going to type in what I want. So I'm going to click or type up in my command line up here, line, and then press enter. You'll notice that each one of these has kind of a different parameter you can select for line. So you can have both sides of line, normal, you can angle it. I typically don't change anything in this kind of a format. So I'm just going to drag my first point and I'm going to type in, let's just do 10 inches. So now I have a 10-inch line. I can hold shift and press enter. And you can type in 10 IN for inches, or you can do 10 and then your quotes. Double quotes is inch, one quote is going to be for feet. To make we can do an array of grid, but I'm going to just show you guys the tutorial just for building a grid line by line. To make it easier for us to kind of know the subdivisions of this, another tool would be divide. So I have my line selected. When I click divide, it'll ask me the number of segments I want to break that line into. You can go in here and you can click split, so it'll actually split those segments into each individual line. If you don't do split, it'll put a point on each one of those. I'm not going to split our line because I want that to be intact. And I want 10 segments. So now that we can see our line right here has 10 different segments, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Now we can go back to our line tool, and I want this to be a 10-inch by 10-inch grid. So I have a 10-inch line right there. To make this easier, instead of copy, paste, drag, if you type in the command copy, it's a very handy tool. I have my line selected. It says point to copy from, so you can copy from any point and drag and drop whatever you want. I tend to actually copy from a specific point, so I have a little bit more precision. So I'm going to copy it right at the edge of that. So every time I place this line, it'll be where I want it to. And since we have those points already generated on the other line, it makes it easy to kind of snap into that. Down here, that's kind of important. These are all going to be kind of control parameters for how you interact with your objects or curves or surfaces inside of the program. So if we have midpoint selected, let's just say I have a line, I'll be able to see where a midpoint is. It'll snap to a midpoint. and you'll see if I take midpoint off, it won't really, well, if I take this guy off, it won't really tell me what the midpoint is. So if you're having difficulty trying to snap to an edge or a midpoint or something like that, look down here and make sure you have some of those selected or not selected. Another useful tool is Gumball. A lot of times Gumball is not turned on. So if Gumball is turned off and I select something, it's just going to be a pure selection. With Gumball though, you get these kind of quick and easy ways to move things. So Gumball will allow us to move in different axes, different places of rotation. And if you click an arrow, you can actually stipulate how far you want it to move. I want it to move 3 inches. Over in rotation, if you click it, you'll be able to say, I want a 47.5 degree of rotation. Oops. Don't put an inch there, it won't recognize it. So it'll get very specific rotation marks. So now that we have one array of lines, what I like to do is I'm going to select all of these lines. I'm going to copy like we did earlier, and I'm going to drag them over here. So now I have another set. To make it easy to kind of use them for a little bit, there's also a helpful thing called group. So group and ungroup is very specific to, or it's very common in all programs. If I make this whole thing a group, I select one object. Oops. Let's see. Now all of them will be selected when I select one. This makes it easy when I have to rotate this 90 degrees. And right now I did the command called move. It'll say, what objects do you want to move? I'll select that and press enter. And if you ever are kind of confused as to the order of operations, your command line is going to give you a lot of information as to how to do that. So right now I selected the objects that I wanted to move, and I'll press enter when I'm done. And then you can click a base point on those lines. And if we bring it right over here, now I have my grid kind of already set up. We can go through and kind of clean this up, so I'm just going to select all my points that I don't really need right now. They were my reference point.
They're showing the filter or no? Yeah.
Oh, select points?
Yeah, if you go down to filter, down here, you can actually just like right click on points. And then now when you're in your workspace, the only thing that you're going to select is points. I don't know if it's going to work because you already, oh yeah, there we go. So you'll notice that even though we kind of dragged over those lines, it didn't actually get rid of them. It was only selecting those points.
Yeah, and actually right click is very important, because if you left click, you'll have to select all of these, but right click will hotkey any of these that you're going to want to actually select. So now that we have our base grid made, I think I have a duplicate right there. It's a single curve. Just going to delete that. I'm just going to ungroup this one real quick so they're all individual lines. We'll just make sure that they all are, and then I will group them again just to make them easier to manage later. So now we have our base grid. We have a 10-inch by 10-inch grid. Right now it looks like I was modeling in the surface layer. So this check mark is going to tell you which layer you're modeling in. I want that to be in my grid layer. If we go over here to properties, it'll tell us where it actually is in, or if I have this selected. So right now it's saying that the layer that I have it in is in surface. I want it to be in grid, so I'll pop it in grid right there. And your color is going to correspond to the color of the grid, or color of the layer that you set up here. So now we know that that's in grid. Now that we're done with this, I'm going to double click my top view, which will open all my other multi-views. And I want to just go into perspective real quick, so I'll double click perspective to have that kind of thing ready to look at. So now we have our base grid. If we want to do some labels real quick, we can type in text, and it'll come up we can sit here and click kind of style that we want. We can go over here and select what font size we want, or style and size. I'm just gonna stay with the standard Arial right now. You can do justification, pretty much similar to Illustrator or any other text-based program. I'm just gonna type 1. And now I have, oops, I'm gonna go back in here and edit this real quick. This one 1. Now with this we can sit here and resize it if we really want to.
Doesn't work unless you explode it, I don't think. Or you can go to properties, it's not to go to properties, I think. Yeah, the height,
Where's my
up 3.
Oh, 1 foot. I don't know why we're in a foot, but typically I can scale 2D. Or so that option that I did was scale 2D. There's scale 1D, and that means 1 dimension. If you want to just scale a block in 1 direction, that's scale 1D. Scale 2D will, in 2 dimensions, scale it. Or otherwise, scale will scale a whole 3D object. But now that I kind of have this one started, we can kind of set it up over here. And then I'm just gonna copy, go into here. I'm just gonna say this one's A. And this is going to be a quick tutorial if you want to line things up a little bit easier. Sometimes if you want your grid snap to be on, our grid snap will allow us to move this in line with our grid. Looks like my grid is not a 1-inch grid right now. But grid snap will help us line things up in the beginning if we want to. Now we can kind of copy paste all of these real quick. And I can resize these later to kind of fit a little bit more on the line. But that's kind of our labeling method. It's going to be for each one of these lines, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that kind of notational values. And then we can do that same operation with our numbers here. I'm just going to go up real quick. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we can go into here and change these for whatever we want real quick. Again, make sure you delete and don't have an enter in there. Don't press enter to close out G first. But we kind of get that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So now if we take our data points that we're going to take from our couch, we can actually assign that in an Excel file form sheet. In Excel, you would do A through whatever, 1 through whatever, and each one of those points, we can put our distance. So now that we have grid and some labels, I'm going to quickly do some layer management real quick. And I'm going to go my properties again. And I'm going to select these and put them in my labels. If you like layer management, it makes it easy for all of us to toggle things on and off, so I can actually turn my labels on and off when I don't want to see them. We'll keep those on for right now. And if for whatever reason you can't really zoom in any further, what's going on is your zoom extents is kind of limited. This little zoom window right here, if you select your entire object that you want to really focus in on, you'll be able to revolve mainly around that. So sometimes if you're really trying to get into something and you just can't quite keep zooming in, you can get a little bit better control with the zoom window. For right now, I just want to be around this object. So now we need to do a little bit of line projectors. An easy way to do lines in perspective, we go to our line tool. A lot of times in perspective, we can't really go in the Z direction. If we hover over our point right here and control click, we can actually, I'm gonna take on snap off, we can actually go in our Z direction. That's a tool that kind of blows everybody's mind because nobody tells you in school. But again, I'm gonna go to my line tool and go into, take my grid snap off.
You disabled.
Oh, did I disable all of it?
Right here. This guy.
Oh, cheers. So right now, I can't really control in the Z direction. You can shift in other directions, but I want to control click right on my point, and that's holding control and clicking. So then I can actually do my heights. So let's just say this one was recorded at 4 inches. Obviously, a lot of these are going to be 15, 10, 12, a little bit higher in that. But then we can keep going with our line tool, control clicking on our point, and if I do this right, so I have a, let's say a 3.2, and let's get a little bit more of this.
Since we're in kind of 3D mode now, there's this little button right here called project. You want to make sure that's off. What project does is, like, if you're in a 2D space and you're looking at something from a plan view, it's only going to draw on one plane. So if you have project checks, you aren't able to draw upwards, basically. So just make sure that's unchecked.
And your space bar is always going to be your friend in this kind of environment. If you're doing a series of lines, you can press space and it'll do the last procedure that you were doing. So you can see if I press space, it'll deactivate. Press space again, my line tool will be active again. I'm going to click, control click. Let's just say this one's going to be. So I'm just going to make a few more of these real quick, and then we'll be able to get on our way. I can get this going. So I'm just doing some random lines real quick. Nothing is measured. Now that we have our lines, to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to go back into our properties. And again, I'm going to bring that to our liner projector. And I'm going to continue to work into that one. So if you double click, make sure your check mark is active on the layer you want to be working in. So now we can see these are assigned purple. I'm going to lock this in. So right now, I'm just going to do copy to get a set of projectors that I'm going to be working with to populate this quick. So let's just say that these are all the fictitious lengths that we have measured to the surface of our chair. Now we have a bunch of these things going on. Now we want to kind of attribute points to those things. And I'm showing you the quick and easy method, or the long method, long division. But you can type in point over here, and if you want to click on each one of these projectors, each one will be assigned a point. And I'm just gonna copy all my points real quick. And this is kind of way too easy right now because I don't really have a lot of different lengths. So I can kind of expedite this process so we can get to the a little bit harder to control patch tool. So now we got kind of this array of points going on. I'm just gonna hide everything other than our points. So now that we have these points, you guys are kind of familiar with in the front row who was doing the, what program did you guys find online to kind of view those?
It was just an XYZ graphs, it was
Just a free viewing thing?
Yeah.
So this one obviously is gonna give you a little bit more control and not just view it. So right now we have all these points. Now we're gonna try to create a surface from these points. This is gonna be a super easy surface to make. If we select all of our points that we had just made, and the tool that we are gonna be using is called Patch. And if we click Preview, we can kind of see this forced surface that's going to be generated through these points. We can sit here and actually adjust all of these parameters and tune in our surface to be a little bit more true to what we want to visualize. So right here you can see that the crest of this is kind of not in line. So we can go through and mess with these parameters to see how well it's going to adjust to this. But you can see it's a very, very loose surface that's going through these points. So for right now, I'm just going to generate this one. And I'm going to change it to a different color because I like having random colors. So now we have this surface that's kind of generated from it. So let's see. Let's see. We do an automatic trim that'll trim it off right at each one of these kind of endpoints. And I'm going to show you a different way to kind of generate these. So right now, it looks like it's a wireframe, and that's because if we go to our dropdown, we're in wireframe viewing. I typically like to model in shaded, ghosted, is my preferred. Ghost is going to give you a little bit of information behind the surface. So right now we can see that there is a solid surface generated. There is an automatic trim control that we can go back and kind of see what the result is for that through our patch tool. We have automatic trim adjusted to it. We can see that it comes through and cleanly cuts off in this nice square. I like to have my own control, so I like it to be a little bit more freeform in the beginning. And I'm going to go through and open my grid again. I'm going to create a square. And then from this square, this is going to be, what am I trying to do right now? extrude, there we go. So extrude curve. And what this allows me to do is extrude in one or two directions from the square that I created. So now we have our surface and this square. And this is going to be our cutting tool. So if we wanted to make this go into the base model or the base layer, I'm just going to keep it in this one. But right now we want to be able to trim this edge into a nice clean tidy thing to follow exactly where our points are hitting, because all this other information is extraneous. It's not within our bounds that we set up for ourselves. So we can actually go to split. So it says select the objects to split. So we want to select our surface that we're going to split. And you can do trim. There's all these other different ways to kind of get rid of extraneous information. I'm going to do split because what it does is it just cuts your object, so you have two parts to deal with, and you can either utilize the one part or toss it away. And then after we have our object that we want to cut, it says select cutting object right up here. So our square is going to be our cutting object. And if we press enter, I'm just going to delete this real quick, what you can see is we have this edge, that's the throwaway part, but then we have the interior. That's what we're going to want to use. So we can kind of get rid of this part right here. And now our surface is nice, clean, and it's actually hitting through all of our points. Now with that patch tool, again, you can sit there and adjust it. If you adjust it enough, this ridge right here will actually be right in line with your points. So it's all about like the fidelity of the object. How close do you want to match that object? So we can kind of get rid of this kind of cool funky shape. And then once we add in all of our other stuff, we can kind of get a overview of what we're trying to kind of do from this. And if we wanted to make sure that this is a solid object for milling, Rhino Cam will take this surface and mill it. I kind of like to make sure they look like a solid. So I'm going to take my curve right here real quick. I'm going to do an extrude again. I'm going to go up past it, and I'm going to actually use my surface as the cutting tool. So again, I'm going to go to split. Whoops. Escape real quick. Do it again. Objects to split. I want to split this cube. And I'm going to use my surface as a cutting object. So now you can see there's a top and a bottom. We can erase the top. And now we kind of have more of a solid object that we can kind of work with in Rhino Cam, which is a CAM software. And CAM software is what you use to translate to CNC technology, which we'll get into once we get done with this stuff. You can come down here and draw a surface to, let me just get rid of all this stuff. We're going to get rid of the grid, projector, points, and labels. So we're just working with surface right now. Right now they are two disconnected objects. I'm just going to select both of them and say join. What it's going to tell us up here is it's two surfaces or polysurface joined into one open polysurface. And the big takeaway is the word open. If it is a completely closed, hermetically sealed thing, it'll be a closed polysurface. The reason why it's open is because we have these planes and an open box on the base. A simple command to kind of clean up an orthogonal unit like this is called cap. And cap can really only be utilized when it has this orthogonal opening. If you click cap, you can actually see that it does have a base now. And one of the distinctions to make up there is we created one cap and it resulted in one closed polysurface. So this whole thing is what they call a solid. And that's kind of our end goal for capturing this lightness of a couch.